They spray our skies,
interact with the magnetic
chemicals.
Space travel is feasible. Mars rover is a complete.
Hi, I'm Rich Lund, and welcome to another episode of Debunk the Funk. Today, we're going to delve into a place that the conspiracy theorists really don't like us to go, whether they're conscious of it or not. Is the idea plausible? In fact, after this episode, if you ever watch any conspiracy theorist videos, you just watch and see if they say something like, "I know it sounds crazy, but," or "I know it's hard to believe, but." Well, after that word, but, they're about to tell you something that's not very plausible. You see, a conspiracy theory can sometimes stay in its safe zone if it's just looked at with the standard of, is it possible? But asking the question, is it plausible, and having the proper tools to be able to reach an answer to that question, well, to a conspiracy theory, that's like garlic to a vampire. If we're only asking whether or not an idea, no matter how outlandish it is, if it's just possible, well, yeah, plenty of things are possible. Plenty of incredibly ridiculous things are possible. But if we also ask along the way of examining new information how plausible the idea is, well, that puts on the brakes pretty quickly. Asking how plausible ideas are can prevent somebody from being duped by a junk idea. Let's look at a fictional example. What if I make the claim that alien shapeshifters are amongst us, and that they've hidden themselves by taking the form of pugs? They observe us and telepathically report their findings to their home planet. And I also make the claim that you can tell an alien pug from a normal pug, because the alien shapeshifters, they're actually a little bit uncomfortable in that form, and so they will roll around on the grass or the carpet because of that uncomfortability. Why, in fact, even pop culture has admitted the presence of the shape-shifting aliens right under our noses. Okay, so I just made a very grandiose claim that something normal, pugs, and I do suppose to dog breeders it's debatable how normal a pug is, that something normal, pugs, is actually divided into two things. True pugs that are normal and alien shapeshifters. And then I also have made the claim that you can discern which one is which by taking something which is a normal behavior and labeling it as the indicator for finding the abnormal category I invented. I've taken a normal category and I've divided it into normal and abnormal. And I've taken a normal behavior, rolling around on the grass, and I'm using that to discern which category that pug is in. Most would reject my claim and just say that, hey, rolling around in the grass, that's a natural behavior that pugs have. We don't have two categories, they're all just normal pugs. And my claim might sound pretty silly. I certainly hope it does. But now, with my alien pug idea in mind, let's take a look at an aspect of the chemtrail conspiracy theory. I've made a few episodes examining the idea of the chemtrail conspiracy and debunking a few of its claims. When it comes to a conspiracy theory, there can be and often are multiple different flavors or types of that conspiracy theory. Most proponents of the chemtrail idea, though, that we're being chemically sprayed by our governments, they do something very similar to what I did here with the pug alien idea. Many chemtrail proponents recognize that yes, condensation trails, contrails, exist. Their viewpoint, though, is that some of those white streaks that we see coming from jets and airplanes, well, some of those are contrails, but other ones are actually chemical sprays that governments are dropping on us for nefarious reasons. So how can one tell a normal contrail from a nefarious chemical spray? Well, if you want the real answer, check out Debunk the Funk number 6. It goes through the physics of contrails and what they are. But from the chemtrail proponent point of view, many of them would make the claim that chemtrails are chemical sprays that will persist in the sky for a long time and even spread out, whereas contrails don't do this, and contrails are something that evaporate pretty quickly, only lasting for a few minutes.
And I've seen a few planes fly over, and it's a contrail. It disperses, it goes away within a matter of 1 minute. But the chemtrails are totally different. They disperse into the air and into big white clouds that stay there for hours, long periods of time.
Feel free to scour such websites or online comments about it. You'll find them bringing this up quite often. But similar to how pugs rolling around in the grass, that's a normal behavior that some, but not all, will sometimes do. I would argue that persisting in the sky for more than a few minutes and sometimes even a few hours is a normal characteristic of contrails that some, but not all, will do. So let's look at today's claim. Condensation trails, or contrails, do not persist for more than a few minutes. Another idea found in most flavors of the chemtrail conspiracy is that chemtrails were only something that got started somewhere in the 90s, some claiming it specifically as the late 90s. And some will even say that they grew up and were alive earlier than the 90s and that they don't remember ever seeing any persistent contrails in the sky prior to the 90s. And that this is evidence that chemtrails not only exist, but that it started happening in the 90s.
And I will tell you, I grew up here. And I remember years ago, I could look up and that's not a blue sky. That's a white smear. There will be days where there's a sunny blue sky. What would be a blue sky, it's not a crystalline blue sky like it was 30 years ago when I was a kid playing in the summers. It's not.
So is it possible that the governments have been spraying us with chemtrails that persist in the sky for hours and that they only started doing this in the 90s? Possible? Sure. But the word possible in that sentence, it leaves a whole lot of wiggle room now, doesn't it? But is the claim plausible? To the general public, the topic of contrails is some pretty specific meteorology, and they probably didn't have an entire chapter devoted to it in their 7th grade science textbook. They might not only find it possible, but also plausible. Pseudoscience and conspiracy theories often are taking advantage of the public's lack of knowledge. Mick West, the author of Escaping the Rabbit Hole, he has an excellent video where he shows in even more detail what I'm about to show you here. And I asked his permission to follow in his footsteps a little bit in the making of this video to do a little bit of what he did too. Here's our first one, The Atmosphere, 7th edition by Frederick L. Lutkins and Edward J. Tarbuck. Prentice Hall Publishing. 7th edition here came out in 1998. Page 104. You have undoubtedly seen condensation trails or contrails in the wake of an aircraft flying on a clear day. Most contrails are produced by jet aircraft engines that expel large quantities of hot, moist air. As this air mixes with the cooler air aloft, a streamlined cloud is produced. Most contrails have a very short lifespan. Okay. Once formed, these streamlined clouds continue to mix with the cold, dry air aloft and ultimately evaporate. However, if the air aloft is near saturation, contrails may survive for long periods. Now, I don't know what you consider a long period of time, but I think it's longer than just a few minutes. But let's do the right thing and consult multiple sources. The Handy Weather Answer Book, which I don't know why they didn't call it the Handy Dandy Weather Answer Book. I think they missed an opportunity there. This is by Walter A. Lyons, Ph.D. This is from 1997 by Accord Publishing. On page 83, the plume of condensed water vapor in the exhaust trailing behind high-flying jet aircraft is called a contrail, short for condensation trail. B-29 pilots during World War II didn't appreciate contrails because they gave away their position. So already in the late 90s, we have 2 textbooks that are talking about contrails as being some persistent things. How's our claim doing? Let's go a bit further back into the past. Peterson Field Guide on A Field Guide to the Atmosphere. Copyright date, 1981. The condensation trail of a jet airplane that is growing in air supersaturated with ice. Ice crystals falling from a condensation trail left by an airplane. Now, page 137, definitely interesting for what we're talking about today. Contrails are a fascinating subject for study. Properly understood, they yield a wealth of information about the current state of affairs in the high atmosphere, where it is difficult to locate weather instruments. Observed systematically, as a function of time, contrail information is a valuable adjunct to forecasting the weather. At one extreme, the air through which the jet is flying might be gently sinking over a large area and thus have a very low relative humidity. In this case, the addition of moisture might be insufficient to produce anything but a very short-lived contrail, quickly destroyed by mixing with the dry surrounding air. When a jet passes and leaves no contrails in the sky, or contrails that quickly disappear, this is a good prognosticator of fair weather. Next paragraph. At the other extreme, the jet flies through air that is gradually rising and becoming cool, and so may be nearly saturated. The addition of moisture from the jet exhaust may then be enough to produce saturation and consequent water drops or ice crystals. A persistent trail is an indicator of moist air, which may be the first sign of an extensive storm area moving into the region. As early as 1981, people were using contrails and how long they last in the sky, just a few minutes or for longer periods of time, to help predict the weather. It's that what causes the contrail to last longer, to be persistent, those are the same weather conditions that are going to cause haze to show up. And people knew back in the 80s that they could use a persistent contrail to be able to predict this. Here's a recent tweet from 2014, which is showing, I'll admit, a pretty interesting and intriguing look at a contrail cloud. Here's a photo from the same Peterson Field Guide from 1981. It's a case of meteorological who wore it better, I suppose. The 2014 alarmist conspiracy tweet or the 1981 Field Guide showing how interesting and variable condensation trails can be. So, how's the claim doing now? Clouds and Weather by R.K. Pillsbury. This is from the Brassford Publishing Company. Page 28. Everyone has noticed the long, thin, white trails left by high-flying aircraft. They sometimes disappear quickly, but on other occasions they persist for a long time. Their persistence depends on the temperature and humidity of the atmosphere at the flight level. Thus, when a warm front is approaching and the cirrus clouds are beginning to form, an aircraft trail will usually tend to persist and even grow because the air at that level is already moist. And you might notice that this book is describing something we've already seen, that when you have a persistent contrail, you may also have cirrus clouds, which some people could describe as a haze, also forming. This book here was published in 1969. Check out Mick West's video, which I'll put in the description below, if you want to see some books that are even older than that on the same subject. Taking all of this information in, yes, somebody could still argue that a government conspiracy, which involves multiple governments to spray their populace with nefarious chemicals, was able to take in book companies and meteorologists and authors and get them all in on this wide global conspiracy as being possible. But as I pointed out in Debunk the Funk number 3, there's always room for the turtle deniers. Check out that episode to see what I mean. But in consideration of all of this information, is this idea plausible? For contrails to be something that doesn't persist, and for chemtrails to be something that started in the 90s, this would also have to mean that authors and publishing companies, respected people, were coerced into this idea as early as the 60s. That these multiple books throughout those years were discussing and describing contrails and their physics in independent yet consistent ways. They contained photographs of these things that supposedly weren't even happening. That these books were describing contrails and their persistence as being pretty commonplace things. And yet this didn't raise any eyebrows? Perhaps to understand if what we're seeing in our skies is normal or not, it's not that we need to look up, as much as maybe we need to go to the library and look up books on cloud formations. I'm calling it. Contrails don't persist for more than a few minutes? Debunked. Contrails can persist for long periods of time. If you do see a contrail persisting for a long period of time, that could indicate that soon after the weather conditions are right, that the sky might become cloudy or hazy. And these contrails that persist have been in our skies much earlier than the 1990s. And these strange, hazy, persistent cloud formations that you see in the sky, while man-made like a pug, are only as equally alarming as a pug rolling around in the grass. Thanks for joining me for another episode of Debunk the Funk. I'm Rich Lund, and I'm here to remind you, the world needs critical thinkers. Make sure that you're one of them. See you next time.